Toronto's official FIFA World Cup 2026 budget is $380 million. That's not an estimate from a critic or a journalist. That's the number the city itself confirmed. It's council-approved budget, supported by the federal and provincial governments. Vancouver's number is worse, between $532 million and $624 million to host 7 matches, up from an original 2023 estimate of just $230 million. And FIFA's number? Approximately $13 billion in revenue across this commercial cycle, with broadcasting rights alone contributing nearly $3.9 billion and sponsorship deals adding almost $2.8 billion. $13 billion going to one organization, hundreds of millions in costs landing on the cities that organization convinced to bid for this tournament in the first place. Today, we're going to walk through exactly how that math works, why it keeps happening every single World Cup, and why one source inside FIFA itself has reportedly called this specific deal the worst in the tournament's history. Here's the basic structure of how a World Cup gets funded, and once you understand it, everything else in this video makes a horrible kind of sense. FIFA captures the vast majority of the central revenue: broadcast deals, global sponsorships, hospitality packages. Host cities and governments, meanwhile, are left to absorb the costs linked to security, transport, stadium preparation, fan zones, public services, and local logistics. FIFA controls the money that comes in. Cities are responsible for the money that goes out. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's the contractual structure of every modern World Cup. And 2026 didn't just continue that structure, multiple sources say it intensified it. Let's get specific, because the specifics are where this story actually lives. FIFA is projected to generate between $11 billion and $13 billion from the 2026 World Cup. Local expenditures per host city are estimated between $100 million and $200 million each, covering stadium upgrades, transportation logistics, policing, and emergency services. The U.S. federal government has allocated $625 million in security grants spread across just 11 host cities. Divide that, and it barely covers a fraction of what each city is actually projected to spend. Now look north. Toronto's projected costs sit around $380 million Canadian dollars. Vancouver's range between $578 million and $624 million Canadian dollars. Combined Canadian host city costs are expected to exceed $1 billion Canadian dollars. Canada's Parliamentary Budget Officer puts total government support for hosting at $1.066 billion Canadian dollars, including $473 million from the federal government and $593 million from other levels of government. Since Canada is hosting 13 matches, that works out to roughly $82 million Canadian dollars per match. $82 million per match before a single ticket is scanned. And on the other side of the ledger, the 11 U.S. host cities are facing a collective shortfall of at least $250 million due to what sources describe as a highly restrictive deal from FIFA, which may force federal, local, and private funding to cover the gap. Here's the part of this story that almost never gets told, because it's not as flashy as a headline number. It's about control. FIFA's commercial contracts are so restrictive that host cities can't even make sponsorship deals with local convenience store chains, because selling food is considered to cut across FIFA's primary partners, like McDonald's. Read that again. A city hosting World Cup matches cannot sign a local food sponsorship because it might compete with a multinational FIFA already has a deal with. Some cities have become so financially desperate that they're reportedly pitching sponsorship opportunities to local dry cleaners and mechanics, small businesses, not multinational brands, just to close funding gaps. Meanwhile, FIFA is set to retain virtually all of the $11 to $14 billion in revenue the tournament is expected to generate. And on tax policy specifically, FIFA demanded sales tax breaks on World Cup tickets, which means millions in lost tax revenue for cities that are simultaneously being asked to shoulder the full cost of infrastructure, security, and logistics. One source close to the situation reportedly asked whether the host cities are even getting help from anyone and questioned whether the U.S. president is aware he's become the public face of what insiders are calling the worst deal in FIFA World Cup history. That's not commentary from a critic. That's a characterization reportedly coming from sources inside the situation itself. Here's what makes this story different from a one-off controversy. This is the pattern. Every time Research from the University of Toronto found that 12 of the last 14 World Cups have resulted in net economic losses for host cities. Looking specifically at the last three tournaments, the average return on investment for host nations has been negative 31%. Negative 31%. Not break-even, not a modest loss. Nearly a third of the investment gone on average across the most recent World Cups before this one. FIFA's standard justification is the promise of economic return. The idea that the influx of tourists spending money on hotels, restaurants, and local business will offset what cities put in. But the data from past tournaments simply doesn't support that promise holding up at the scale FIFA claims. And FIFA's own financial position tells its own story here. A portion of this World Cup's proceeds is expected to strengthen FIFA's financial reserves, which declined from $3.9 billion after the Qatar World Cup to $2.7 billion by the end of 2025. FIFA isn't just generating revenue to cover the cost of running a tournament, it's rebuilding its own reserve fund using a structure where the cities footing the operational bill see none of that benefit. Some cities have tried to protect themselves contractually. In Toronto, the city and Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment drafted an agreement specifically designed to shield the company from suffering losses related to World Cup matches, splitting net revenue equally up to $10 million, read between the lines of that arrangement. A private company negotiated protection from losses on a World Cup match. The city did not get the same protection from FIFA. Here's where this lands, and it's worth sitting with for a second. Every dollar in that $100 to $200 million per city isn't coming from FIFA's $13 billion. It's coming from municipal budgets, from the same pool of money that funds road repairs, public schools, and emergency services in the years before and after this tournament ends. FIFA sets the revenue projections. FIFA controls the broadcast rights. FIFA locks in the sponsorship deals. FIFA dictates the hosting requirements and the actual financial risk of pulling off the event, the part where something could go wrong, where costs could run over, where security needs change, falls on municipal governments that, in most cases, are already operating with strained budgets. This isn't a story about whether the World Cup is worth hosting. The football, when it happens, genuinely is extraordinary. This is a story about who gets to keep the $13 billion and who gets handed the bill for the security guards, the road closures, and the stadium upgrades that made that $13 billion possible in the first place. So, here's the full picture. FIFA, somewhere between $11 and $13 billion in revenue, the vast majority of it retained centrally. Host cities across the US and Canada, hundreds of millions in costs each, with at least $250 million shortfall already confirmed across the 11 American host cities alone. A historical pattern where 12 of the last 14 World Cups have lost their host cities' money, and the last three averaged a 31% loss on investment. This isn't a glitch in the system. This is the system. FIFA built a financial model where the organization captures almost all the upside, and the municipalities that make the spectacle physically possible absorb almost all the risk. The trophy gets lifted in New Jersey on July 19th. The Bills in Toronto and Vancouver and 11 American cities will still be getting paid long after that. Here's what I want to know from you. Do you think hosting the World Cup is still worth it for a city given numbers like these? Or has FIFA's commercial model finally tipped the scale so far that it's simply not a good deal anymore for anyone except FIFA itself? And if you live in or near one of these host cities, Toronto, Vancouver, Dallas, Seattle, anywhere on that list, I want to hear what you're actually seeing on the ground. Are you noticing the costs, the cutbacks? Tell me in the comments. If this kind of breakdown is worth your time, a like helps more than you'd think. Subscribe. We're tracking the financial story of this World Cup all the way through the final.